Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Adams. I am Director of Compliance with EANE. And I would like to welcome you to our May HR Compliance webinar on the heels of this upcoming Memorial Day weekend. I'll be happening later on this week. So I hope you have a happy Memorial Day in advance, but I just wanted to say, for those of you that might have initially been logging in hopes of seeing a webinar on the Fair Labor Standards Act and the upcoming salary changes, we were originally intending to cover that topic here today in anticipation of the Department of Labor releasing information on their proposed rule on that. But that, of course, did not come to pass. And as a result, we decided to make a pivot and decided it would be beneficial to put this webinar on the benefits and perils of ChatGPT. And based on the level of attendance here, I can see it is something that really has been top of mind for many of you. And we are going to kind of talk about that, given that this is a subject that has gained more and more attention and scrutiny. So with all that being stated, and for those of you just logging in, we are recording this program, so certainly just wanted to make you all aware of that when it comes to that. Okay. So, like the platform itself, the subject of ChatGPT is ever expanding and growing and evolving. And we cannot cover everything that ChatGPT really addresses in this short webinar. But what we are going to cover, well, first, we're going to address what is, in fact, this whole platform in the first place, its origins, its versions over time, and what is now forthcoming, and what will be evolving in the future. We are then going to pivot into addressing how it can be applied in the world of human resources based on today's technology. And I do mean today because, of course, as it continues to evolve and grow, the functionality and applications, of course, will probably evolve and grow with it. We will then speak to its limitations as well as its pitfalls. And we will, of course, try to address your questions the best way we can, and also do a little demonstration of it along the way as well. So again, if you've had questions that you had coming into the program, feel free to drop those into the question and answers feature of the Zoom platform. Again, we will be going for about an hour here today. Okay. But first of all, let's kind of take a step back and really talk about the business case and need for this type of technology. According to Mercer, in its 2023 HR Service Delivery Survey, which it co-sponsored this year in conjunction with Learpin, when it comes to those who were surveyed who currently use some sort of technology like chatbots or some live agent chat. Okay, and for those of you maybe that have dealt with the likes of Amazon, you've dealt with this experience yourselves with their customer service experience too. According to them, they plan to increase the usage of these type of technologies in the future, or at least maintain them. And as you can see here from this graphic, other things that are going to be on the rise are the likes of collaboration tools as well as email technology. And based on the findings of the survey, this sudden rise can be attributable to a large need to adopt this type of technology in the wake of the pandemic and the disruption that many organizations faced when they were compelled to connect with their suddenly remote workforces. Through the disruptions, companies began to discover that these forms of technology could provide a greater inroads when it came to addressing pressing needs in a more timely fashion. As the survey also shows, however, there is also a shift towards decreasing certain personal forms of engagement, such as forums and in-person and walk-up engagements, while moving to this greater use of technological means. Like I mentioned before, this notion of live chats and chatbots. So that's what the surveys show when it comes to the business case and needs. And that kind of really, it sets the stage for the topic we're going to cover here today. But now let's I'd like to ask those of you here, and I'd like to introduce a poll that I would like to launch. And that is, have you, in fact, dabbled with ChatGPT already? Now, and I see some people quickly jumping in on this. Certainly would welcome your participation from the dozens and dozens of you that are logging in today as the poll rapidly fills up. Thank you very much. And whether it's you or colleagues on your team, your senior leaders, your C-suite, to the best of your knowledge, has it been something that you're utilizing actively or experimentally? All right, so yeah, just a few more people. Give it just another second or so. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results. Had over 90% of the attendees complete this question. And we kind of have, a slight majority that have not currently used it or maybe don't know what it is. But there's a fair amount of you, almost 40%, that has already used that technology to some degree. So what I'd like to do right now is, I guess I would like to open the question to all of you. And again, you can express your thoughts in the chat if you would like, or otherwise, but what has that experience been for those of you who have used it? Any thoughts on that? You can feel free to kind of express those thoughts in the chat as the case might be. What has been your use of it? Oh, okay. Well, I see it's been disabled. I apologize for that functionality issue. But what we're going to talk about then is certainly getting into how it can be used for you, so that you can compare to what you're currently been using and how it can better benefit for you. But again, getting into the agenda in the first place, what are we talking about here? What is ChatGPT for those of you who are still trying to learn some of the scope on this to some degree? At its very core, ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence chatbot. And contrary to, I think, some perceptions that some have kind of gleaned for recent news stories, it's in fact many years in the making. While the prototype was launched in a very large scale last year, its origins actually go back to 2018 when it comes to that. When we're talking about the origins of it, it's tied to this organization called OpenAI that developed ChatGPT back in 2015. And the first version of this application was actually launched back in the middle of 2018 after some considerable amount of research and testing. Its foundation in version 1 was based on a concept known as natural language processing. So what is this? Well, the best way I can describe it is to compare it really for what many of us probably know based on our own experiences, and that is web search engines. When you use the likes of Google or Bing or some sort of other internet search engine, and you type in a search term, The web search engine will provide you with a listing of web pages that match that search from the internet. With this NLP technology, instead of providing you with a list of items from the internet, it will instead provide you with a narrative or summary of your query, not based on the information from the internet as a whole, but rather from a data set or knowledge base that has been fed into ChatGPT, whereby it analyzes patterns of language found in that data, and that has been fed into the application. And based on its algorithms, I should say, provide you with a summary response. Now, back to the evolution here for a minute. Version 1 really was the establishment of the technology itself. The data or parameters that drew from that was extremely limited. So its application really hadn't been fleshed out much. Version 1 was, in essence, the building block, otherwise known to some as ChatGPT 1. But over time, large part of this was the infusion of more information, or what some call parameters, into the application for the technology to learn, so to speak. With the massive infusion of information in version 3 in mid-2020, this is when the technology really took off for commercial applications. It is also when it can be used in other languages, by the way, other than English as well. In version 4, which is currently in the beta stages and is accessible for select, or what is known as GPT plus users, is free through a user account, though ChatGPT Plus requires, as of now, a monthly subscription of $20 a month. So you have the free version, and then you also have a monthly subscription version. So what does version 4 bring is not only the ability to process language, but also the ability to analyze images too, specifically to send out images in the chat, and the tool will instantly analyze and describe everything found in the image. So as we can see here, the functionality of this AI technology is continuing to evolve. So just like we draw from our past experiences, knowledge and understanding, it is fed into this platform so that the platform can innovate and problem solve future needs. ChatGPT draws upon a library of knowledge. So what kind of information is fed into ChatGPT? Numerous books, journals, Wikipedia as a source. It's not just scientific data, but it's also historical information, factual information, things that are out there publicly in the internet that has been curated, if you will, by OpenAI and fed into the system. But as this technology has grown, companies have started to see the ability to partner with ChatGPT and OpenAI to meet their own commercial needs as well. Now, you may be asking, how does that happen? Well, according to OpenAI, ChatGPT can be connected to an organization's own information or data by way of plugins, which can connect ChatGPT to third-party applications. These plugins enable ChatGPT to interact with what's known as APIs, which are defined by developers and enhance ChatGPT's capabilities in allowing it to perform a wide range of applications. So while the off-the-shelf ChatGPT can certainly generate content for users who might decide to access the web platform and use it on their own based upon what it's been trained on currently, connecting it to other applications can allow it to be trained on that information and therefore perform other tasks as well, such as some of the examples that are listed here on the slide. Now, obviously, some of these don't have an HR application itself, But these are applications that are actively promoted by OpenAI as an illustration to give you an idea of its functionality. The question then becomes, how will businesses and HR professionals take advantage of it in their space itself? I'm just keeping an eye here on the question and answers. And right now, there are companies actually using it, and it's actually unfolding before our very eyes. Now, some of these certainly are larger organizations, of course, but it does give a perspective that over time it will be scaled and used for other companies of all shapes and sizes. So when we're talking about Salesforce as an example, they're a software organization and they partner with ChatGPT in order to introduce its own tool for customers. So that for Salesforce customers that have needs where they're reaching out to Salesforce for assistance, they have this now identity that they put out there called Einstein GPT, which basically interacts with the customer's own, or I should say the company's own, customer relation management system, or CRM, and is used currently to compose emails, schedule meetings for customers, auto-generate personalized chat replies to customers, provide insights, and more. So they have embedded ChatGPT or linked to its own information regarding its products and its systems. So as questions come from customers, it analyzes the knowledge that Salesforce has on its products to be able to then respond in a rather timely manner to those needs. Microsoft has used the latest version of ChatGPT for its Bing chat service, which is available with the latest version of Microsoft Edge in terms of being able to answer user queries as well. When we're talking about other organizations like Coca-Cola, they're owned by a larger global management organization by the name of Bain Capital. And Bain has partnered with OpenAI to integrate ChatGPT into its management systems and rolling it down where Coca-Cola is going to be the first of its companies to use it to assist with performance management issues. So, and then again, so you can kind of see here, there are a lot of different ways that in essence, companies are looking to basically, as I like to describe it, bolt in or connect ChatGPT into companies' own information to meet certain specific needs, applications, respond to both internal and external customers, so to speak, in order to meet their company's own needs. Now, what I like to do right now is I like to demonstrate ChatGPT. And again, we are just using the basic version 3 of ChatGPT that is out there for anyone to use. We are not using it where it has been embedded within our organization's own information that we have at the Employers Association. So I don't want anyone to think that we've got this thing tapped in by APIs into our own information. We certainly don't. So let's see what it can do. And I'm going to do I'm going to stop my screen share here. And I am going to so what you all should see right now is a screenshot of the ChatGPT website. And you can get to this at openai.com for those of you that have not looked at it before. And you can set up a free account. You just put in an email address. It'll then authenticate the email address through two-step authentication. And you can set up an account and you can use it free of charge. So as an example here, once you set up an account and you can kind of see on the left, I've already kind of have histories. It'll track the history in which you've used it for past inquiries. So I could sit here and at the bottom, there's a little window at the bottom where I can send ChatGPT a message. And I might sit there and say, write me an attendance policy. And it's going to sit there and think for a little bit. And look what happens. It starts to generate again, this was just simply a direction to write me a policy. And it's going to start flushing out a policy for me. Talking about expectations, talking about absences, and basically how it works, accounting for different scenarios. Now, hopefully, I know we're all online. Hopefully the lag isn't too significant on your end watching this demonstration. And it's going to continue to generate this policy. Now, you may ask yourself as you're watching this in motion, well, how can I kind of take this and work with it after it's been generated? Well, you could certainly copy and paste the content from this window and drop it into like a Word document or something like that if you wanted to, and then continue to work around it after it's done. There are web extensions or plugins that are out there that you can plug into the likes of Chrome or whatever web browser you're using that will allow the functionality to more directly export that data in a more seamless fashion. And I would suggest you check with your, look at your, whether it's Google Play Store or Apple Store, as the case might be, to see whatever applications or extensions would be relevant for your own internet engine, whether it's Edge or Chrome, as the case might be. But you can kind of see here, it provides a fairly detailed policy on a variety of topics that's out there. But, one of the questions that's out there is, well, what do you not see when you look at this? Okay. It certainly provides a starting point for a policy. The question's going to be, is this fully something that would fit for your organization, your culture, your need, your specific approaches as managers on how to address certain topics, if you will, on this particular subject? So it provides a good starting point, but it by no means is going to fully replace where you could just slap your company name and logo on it and call it a day. There might be certain aspects of this that you might need to address. Now, when I look at some of the ones I've done in the past here, I just pulled this up earlier. It's not pulling up. So one of the things I would point out there when it comes to this is when we're talking about ChatGPT and information, I'm just trying to, here we go. So again, you can see here's an example where I asked ChatGPT to write me a vacation policy. And again, you could see it's got placeholders for you to customize. Well, how much time and how is it accrued? What's your company name? But you might sit there and look at something like this and say, well, I don't want to do an accrual method for vacation. I want to do it in a front load. So what it might be is that you need to, tweak your inquiry with ChatGPT to be able to have it generate something that's more in alignment with your hope or expectations, if in fact your first query didn't quite address everything you were looking for it to accomplish when it comes to that. But again, when you look at this, again, it gets into, and I'm just going to get into a couple of things I wanted to address here. So here's one about generating a performance review tool. And now based on the query, you can see here, this didn't give me an out-of-the-box performance review tool. Gave me more of an outline of things to consider. And then when I told it to write me one instead of develop me one, well, now we've got something that is more defined and specific. So one of the things that I've found with ChatGPT, how you query the platform is very instrumental and pivotal is what you get out of it in terms of meeting your expectations when it comes to that. And again, lays out certain criteria. Now, you might look at some of the criteria in this performance evaluation tool and sit there and say, well, there are certain criteria that I don't want to use in my own tool. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to meet your needs. And as we know with our membership at EA&E, we got for-profit organizations, not-for-profit, manufacturing, non-manufacturing, everything in between. And with that, there are different ways of attacking a given subject when it comes to that. So, here's an example of a Massachusetts paid family and medical leave policy where I said, write me a Massachusetts paid family and medical leave policy. And it gave me a whole array. But again, it's not going to address specific topics. It might be that my organization pays into a private plan and I'm not paying into the public system. And maybe this policy, therefore, isn't going to address those needs, as the case might be. So, but one of the things I also wanted to point out here is, what does ChatGPT thinks its own role is? And I asked that question of it. What is the role of artificial intelligence in the workplace? And this is what it told me. What's the number one thing that came right to the top of this list? It's about making things more efficient, making things more automated. Okay. When you look at all of these items, making it more efficient, making it more, helping to help through the efficiency to help make a more productive customer experience. What you don't see here is things that get to culture. It doesn't get into things like ethics. It doesn't even specifically get into, things that might be concerns about bias. But even ChatGPT addresses firsthand, that companies still have to address those things themselves to make sure its use by companies doesn't put them at risk. ChatGPT even tells us that itself. So when you're talking about that, there are limitations when it comes to the product it generates, the information it generates, and whether or not it makes sense for your organization from a cultural aspect of things. Will it meet that out of the box perfectly for the version of it right now? The answer to that question probably is no when it comes to that. So I wanted to provide a bit of a demonstration there. And what I'd like to do now is turn our attention back. If I can get this screen share to work again. Back to the aspect of HR applications. So seeing it in practice and hearing how some companies are using it already, begs the question, how can I use it in my HR department? Well, most analysts see significant applications when it comes to tactical HR functions. Just like Salesforce is using ChatGPT for its customer service applications, we as HR professionals may be able to leverage it with our own internal customers, our employees, when it comes to answering common questions, bolting, if you will, ChatGPT to self-service portals through APIs, feeding specific information so that it can communicate answers to employees' questions based on company knowledge when it comes to the likes of companies' own policies, maybe general, though non-confidential aspects regarding benefit offerings, time off requests, and other tactical aspects of HR. But it can also be a catalyst and a starting point to help fashion policies, forms, and checklists, like I had just demonstrated a short while ago. Think about other things. I know we're all meeting, we all have challenges with talent acquisition and recruiting. Maybe you are just having a challenge thinking of interview questions. Certainly you could probably use ChatGPT to help you kind of stimulate your initial thought processes on that to generate interview questions that you might need. Now, again, whether those are the right fit for the specific job you're hiring for certainly is another matter. Using the free versions of ChatGPT will get you moving on those items. Like I said, if you're kind of confronted with writer's block on certain issues when it comes to helping you develop material, content, questions, forms, policies, things of that nature. Okay. But like I said, there are limitations when it comes to fit and alignment in cultural applications. So when we're talking about attendance policies, again, as an example, who should be the one that's involved with this as the gatekeeper? Are employees calling HR? Employees calling their immediate supervisor? How are, call-out procedures going to work specifically? What are the time frames for call-out procedures? When people call out, what's the follow-up protocols for thereafter? Is the manager going to call them back? What happens if they can't get a hold of the manager? Do they go somewhere else? What's excessive absence? Is that going to be defined in the policy? Is it going to be somewhat generic? So you might be able to get ChatGPT to spit out a policy version, but again, you might need to modify things a bit for it to really be effective for your business. Remember, as I showed earlier, in terms of the hallmarks and benefits of ChatGPT, its focus is on productivity and efficiency. Effectiveness is a slightly different issue, and it may not always be truly effective when you're generating something at a first pass when it comes to things. And that's where I think those of you on the line today in HR, taking on more of that business partner view, really needs to look at how things should be aligned, how things strategically should be developed and deployed to meet our business objectives. What this technology is going to really do is it's going to really force us to focus more in that space, especially as businesses and C-suite level managers sit there and say, okay, we're going to use this technology to take some of the tactical burdens off of your plate so you can really focus your time, energies, and efforts more in a strategic realm. Now, of course, there are limitations elsewhere too. If you are using version 3 that is out there and publicly accessible, it may provide you with output that you can use, but without other company information to draw from, like I said, there are alignment issues. But the other thing to be mindful is that when it comes to compliance-related matters, it may not necessarily cover all of your bases. Should you decide to leverage this technology to keep you in the loop when it comes to, for instance, your legal responsibilities in the realm of HR? And that's based on a couple of main factors. First of all, as I mentioned earlier with ChatGPT, it's fed knowledge into its platform so that it itself learns. And when it comes to version 3, which is the one that's commercially out there online, that is based on information that was fed into it up to 2021. So when you take a step back and think for a second, anything that's kind of popped up after that, a law, some key court case, a legal concept, a change in the law, won't be reflected on that. So there is still some need to do some fact checking, truly to make sure you're on safe ground. Of course, connecting it to a third-party application via some API can change that, however. But again, it likewise raises the question of whether that information itself is accurate and compliant. You know, if you are an organization that wants to link ChatGPT to your own company policies that you have so that you can better autonomously educate your employees and respond to their questions, well, if that knowledge, if those policies are non-compliant, ChatGPT certainly is just going to perpetuate non-compliant responses to those requests too. It's basically going to operate off of, again, the knowledge that it has access to when it comes to that. And then the second thing, of course, like I mentioned earlier, is the queries that you put into the platform. Does it provide the necessary parameters to account for the right information for the output it provides a user? That too can have a key outcome when it comes to accuracy as well. And I'm looking here when it comes to, someone asked that we share the slides after the session. People who have signed up for the program, we will be getting that slide deck out to people afterwards, but thank you for the question on that. But getting back to then pitfalls, you know, we talked about the limitations, but then there's the pitfalls nonetheless. And again, ChatGPT will actually, by its own admission, tell you it's not perfect. You know, despite its algorithms, there have been news stories about reported hiccups that have come out of the generation of content. And just like a house is only as good as its foundation, its utility is only as good as the parameters fed into the application. Thus, the foundational information or parameters that are fed into ChatGPT, if they are in themselves not accurate and they're biased in the first place, then that can have the potential of providing information that's inaccurate, biased, or arguably even discriminatory as well. And it is out of these concerns that there's been a joint statement published by the FTC and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission on this very concern, warning employers that they are in effect responsible for and can be liable for their actions if the use of this technology creates those type of bias or discriminatory outcomes. And there'll be more, I'll mention more on that in a minute. So certainly bias is a major concern here. And then there is the question of intellectual property. Who owns the content specifically the outputs that is generated from the platform for someone who accesses it and creates things. Well, when we're talking about information that's based off of knowledge from the platform, that itself is copyright protected. You know, there could still be questions of whether or not they still have ownership over the applicable outcome or application. Now, the end user agreement that's out there for people who utilize this points to the end user having ownership of the outputs. However, we haven't seen courts as of yet chime in on this matter when it comes to that. Again, ChatGPT, if you were to ask it, and again, I'll go back to one of my queries. That I put out there. Where did you get your body of knowledge? And it says, my knowledge is acquired from a diverse range of sources on the internet. I've been trained on a vast amount of text data, including books, articles, website, and other textual sources. Well, to the degree that those sources themselves are copyrighted and protected for commercial use or redistribution, the question really is going to be, how are courts going to look at that based on what evolves from the use by others? And that's something that only judges and juries are going to, or it won't be juries, but mostly judges, are going to handle when it comes to those things that are out there. So again, this is something that are some of the open questions that have yet to be addressed on this subject. And then there's the question of whether a company itself can in fact copyright the output that's generated. So I talked about earlier the stuff that's out there that's already copyrighted to begin with. What about the outputs coming out of ChatGPT? Can that in fact be copyrighted? And according to the US Copyright Office, they have weighed in on the question in March by saying that for something to be copyrighted, it has to be based upon human authorship. And to the degree that AI is used to some degree, that must be disclosed should a company subsequently seek copyright for the content that's been generated. So obviously for people that are generating something out of ChatGPT and then making modifications, edits, changes off of that, it really creates the question of, well, how much of it is attributable to what a human, so to speak, is contributing to the end product versus the platform. So when it comes to that, in short, Copyright Office is going to be considering those requests on a case-by-case basis itself. And then there's finally the question of confidentiality. Bear in mind that companies who link ChatGPT through APIs to its own data or information provide permission, whether they realize it or not, for that information to actually be used by that technology in its learning moving forward in the future. And for the company Samsung, they learned that the hard way when a Samsung engineer who had some issues or challenges with developing some updated code, uploaded sensitive, confidential, and proprietary code into the platform to help it, or to basically help the employee get kind of overcome some of the issues that they were having with kind of enhancing their code and their technology. What that engineer failed to realize is because of the user agreement, that's something now that kind of was more accessible as a result of that. And again, that kind of lays out some of the dangers when you kind of link into and allow for using that technology. Now, other companies have kind of taken positions where they're restricting their employees on the use of the platform. JP Bank, the US investment bank, JP Morgan, for instance, has restricted use from its staff. Amazon has warned its employees not to upload confidential information, such as code, into ChatGPT. So they have kind of not gone as far as JP Morgan has, and has said, look, you can use it, but just don't use our own confidential or proprietary stuff when you're interacting with this technology. So every company is a little bit different as to how much they want to kind of dip their toe in the water in the use of this technology. And like I alluded to, we have this joint communication that's out there, that's been put out there, reminding employers that they can be held accountable for the outcomes associated with this use. I've noted that link here. And, you know, this quote from this joint statement is pretty telling. You know, while these tools can be useful, they also have the potential to produce outcomes that can result in unlawful discrimination. Okay. But by no means, as far as the utility, it can be pretty beneficial. It can be beneficial as a way of helping develop and stimulate thought and content that people then can ultimately use and change and modify and integrate to meet their needs in a more timely manner. There have even been cases where employees who are disabled, who might have impairments that might impede their ability, for instance, to read and write, and otherwise interact due to physical limitations, have used ChatGPT to help facilitate the ability of performing certain aspects of their job. Of course, in things that are not confidential or proprietary. So there are benefits in using this tool in a constructive way, but again, it's also something that does have the potential for harm and danger. And just last week, the Senate Judiciary Committee has held hearings on this very subject, wanting greater transparency. During those hearings, it was reported out by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who, in working alongside, is committed to trying to create a framework that requires more transparency within the using this type of technology when it comes to artificial intelligence models, where it would require those type of organizations that put out these models to disclose, you know, how those platforms were trained, what those data sources were more specifically. But that still is something that's a work in progress and is still being fleshed out. In those hearings, OpenAI's own CEO, Sam Altman, advocated more the need to have some new government agency created that would have the authority to license AI models and monitor safety standards and audits, but didn't quite go to the level that the majority leader was advocating, and that was the need to being more transparent. Because let's face it, when it comes to different platforms that are out there, Google, for instance, is developing its own called Google Bard. You know, one of the key differentiators in this, you know, kind of this arms race of artificial intelligence is how do these platforms learn and what information is accessible. That's really going to give one a leg up on the other, and why CEOs like Sam Altman don't want that level of greater transparency, because that could conceivably minimize a market advantage that it has with its product over others. So we will see what ultimately comes out on Capitol Hill when it comes to the greater regulation of this platform. But understand that we as employers need to be really mindful that we are dealing with a technology that has very little regulation at the present time. So in the interim, there remains an ethical dilemma of what companies are able to do and what they should in fact do, how to use it, how to communicate it to their employees, and how transparent they want to be with their employees as to why and how that those platforms are being used. Because certainly it creates fear and concern from employees as to whether will their jobs be outsourced? Will they be eliminated? Or will they simply change where this tool is designed to augment and supplement their needs so that they can then focus on other tasks and responsibilities that might provide greater value? Every company is going to be a little bit different in tackling these questions, but formulating responses to those is going to be very important. Now, independently from this joint statement that was out there, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has also chimed in itself to say that when it comes from the use of AI, don't lose sight of the fact that the agency's own uniform selection guidelines still apply, and that those principles govern how HR professionals use AI like ChatGPT, should they connect it through APIs into its systems, its job descriptions, its other knowledge points when it comes to performance review systems and the like, to try to identify or use that technology, let's say in selection and pre-screening considerations. And employers can be liable under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act if the outcomes of those uses create an adverse impact on a particular group. The EEOC, through this guidance, has said, even if the employers relied on these tools that are developed or administered by a third party or vendor, like OpenAI when it comes to ChatGPT, or like Bard if you're talking about Google's own, that if an employer is using this technology in ways that disproportionately screens out protected groups, company can still be liable for those outcomes. So in so doing, the EEOC reminds employers that, again, when you're talking about those disproportionate outcomes and it being violation of Title VII, the employer's got to overcome that burden by showing that the use is job-related and consistent with business necessities. Now, that's standard. These guardrails, frankly, are nothing new, as let's face it, they exist with employers when it comes to selection decisions in general. But again, what it means is employers need to be more aware of what information they're connecting it to, what type of criteria they're putting into these platforms, and be able to have a better identity or better understanding of the outcomes that might engender. And look critically at those outcomes to see if there are disproportionate impacts, because if the answer to that question is yes, then that becomes a call to action for HR to reassess more specifically whether or not that's defensible or not. So again, when all is said and done, ChatGPT can be a very useful tool if you set parameters on how it's going to be used. And again, that's key. Given that it's unregulated right now, given the lack of case law and history on this, given the relative lack of transparency, companies really need to consider carefully to what degree and how it is to be utilized. so that it helps and does not hinder your business in the end. It's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to grow. It is going to be something that companies are going to have to address just to maintain being competitive, just to make sure that companies can be as efficient as they possibly can, to better deploy their human talent, to better even overcome some of the challenges that they might have by being short-staffed. But still, there are key questions that companies need to wrestle with when crafting their own policies or practices for the use of it currently and in the future. And I just put some of these questions up here for you to think about when it comes to that. Because of the potential, in the future when it comes to compliance issues that may later arise, or whether your information is put out there in a way that could put your company at risk because you're compromising key proprietary information and know-how. So that is what I wanted to cover here today. Let's see what sort of questions we might have that are out there. After all, this is your program. Let's kind of take a look at some of these. Does it need a separate, someone asked the question, does it need a separate policy or can it be rolled into social media? I would say that frankly, it should be more of a standalone because the applications of this aren't necessarily limited to external communications that employees themselves have, but the applications just might be more tied to how an organization is using the technology to meet its own internal operational needs itself. So I think the subject goes a bit beyond the scope of what would be typically covered in a social media policy. Another question about, for others that are online, would they be willing to share what they've used and whether it's been helpful? We don't have really that full functionality within the webinar itself. One thing I would point out to all our members, of course, is that we have an emerging community on our website at eane.org, where companies are free to share amongst themselves key questions, topics, challenges, and draw from the experiences of each other. Certainly, I would say that this would be a great subject to kind of put out there in the community to draw perspective from others. So that would be a suggestion I would put out there. And besides, this would also allow you to tap others that weren't on the webinar here this morning. Final question is regarding the spelling of ChatGPT. It is C-H-A-T, the letter G, the letter P, the letter T. So if I wasn't enunciating that properly, I apologize. So looks like I've gotten to all the questions. So that is what I wanted to cover here today. Thank you for joining us for today's HR compliance webinar. As always, all of our webinars and training offerings that we put out there for members are out there on our website. Don't forget to check for continuing updates of dates and times for all of our public programs at eane.org. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and your upcoming Memorial Day weekend as well. Take care.